In the little village that I grew up in, there were 4 churches. There was a United Church, which is a Canadian phenomenon, the United Church of Canada. There was a little Anglican church, there was a Presbyterian church, and there was a little Roman Catholic church. But upriver from where I grew up, there was a Pentecostal church. And it was always, for those of us in sort of these more kind of mainline traditional, it was sort of thought of as kind of a weird place. And sort of Pentecostal was almost a bad word. Well, of course, Pentecostal as Christians is not a bad word. We come upon the Feast of Pentecost this Sunday. And of course, that is this great feast where God pours out His Holy Spirit upon His church to empower and equip and enable His church to do the work that they've been given to do, to be the mission of the gospel in the world. And there are 2 things I think that are the work of the Holy Spirit that we tend to think about, and there may be many things beyond this, but I'm going to think about 2 things in particular. The first, of course, are those very spectacular supernatural gifts of the Holy Spirit. We see, for example, in the day of Pentecost, the gift of tongues, where people speak in languages, in tongues, as it says, as the Lord gives them utterance. And there is this miraculous ability to speak in different tongues. I mean, there are other sort of great gifts of the Holy Spirit, like discernment and healing and miracles and things like that, where we see the supernatural power of God in remarkable ways poured out upon His church. And of course, we read through Acts and we see all of these things happening throughout the book of Acts, and I would suggest to you throughout the life and the history of the church. But there is a danger, of course, to think that that is all that the Holy Spirit does, or these kind of wild, spectacular, supernatural things. There are some things that are perhaps a little more mundane, that is the work of the Holy Spirit. More mundane, but no less supernatural, I would suggest. And really, it is the work of sanctification and really the power and the grace that is given to us by the power of the Holy Spirit to simply do the work that God has given us to be witnesses of Christ in the world, to have the capacities to any grace that we receive from God that may seem very mundane. It's not spectacular. I'm not speaking in tongues and I'm not seeing somebody rise up and walk. It is the capacity simply to have the words to witness to somebody. It is the capacity to make a choice not to sin, because the capacity to sin is within me, but the choice not to sin is perhaps not within me. These are these more fundamentally less sort of splashy, but really important works of the Holy Spirit that is within us. Now, I think there's, of course, a danger of dwelling entirely on the spectacular and forgetting about the mundane, but there's also a danger about dwelling on the mundane and forgetting the spectacular. Because even while those more mundane gifts of the Spirit are, I think, very critically important to us day in and day out in our Christian walk, just the grace to live the life that God has called us to live, God still does miraculous things. God still heals people. God still raises the dead. We've heard stories, I have never seen it myself, but I've heard stories in other parts of the world where there have been people raised from the dead. We serve a supernatural and miraculous God. And we must resist the temptation in living in those more mundane realities of the Spirit to not forget that God is still doing great, spectacular, miraculous things in our lives and in our world. So as we think about Pentecost, I love to hold both of those things together. The daily mundane reality that I need His Spirit within me just to make the right choices in my life. But I also need the spectacular, the supernatural, those supernatural gifts that remind us that God is truly a supernatural and mighty God. May you know the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost.